Hey guys, tonight we're going to trace one of the most laborious, elemental, and frankly beautiful processes in human history, the creation of vellum. Close your eyes for just a second and imagine a silent scriptorium in a medieval monastery. The air is cool and smells faintly of beeswax and old wood. The only sound is the gentle, rhythmic scratch of a quill pen moving across a creamy, luminous page. That page, holding words that will echo for 1,000 years, didn't come from a tree. It didn't come from a factory. It began its life in a field, under a soft sun, as the living skin of a young calf. It's a multi-month journey of astonishing craft and, let's be honest, some pretty intense smells. If you were tasked with this job back in the 12th century, you probably wouldn't survive the apprenticeship without losing your lunch at least once a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As always, I'd love to see where you're listening from tonight. Go ahead and drop your city and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always amazing to see this little community of ours stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story doesn't begin in a dusty workshop. It doesn't begin with books or ink at all. It begins here, in a wide green pasture, under a sky the color of washed-out linen. The air is damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth and the sweet grassy scent of livestock. You can hear the low, contented tearing of grass as the cows graze, the occasional distant bleat of a sheep, and the buzz of insects dancing in the afternoon light. You are a pergamentarius, a parchment maker, and this field is your primary supplier. Your tools for this first part of the job aren't knives or frames, but your eyes and your hands. Your task is to select the raw material for the finest writing surface known to humanity. You are here to choose a calf. You walk slowly among the herd, your boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The animals watch you with wide, curious, placid eyes. A mother cow lows softly as you approach her offspring, and you give her a wide, respectful berth. She's giving you a look that says, "My baby is not a future manuscript, thank you very much." You're not looking for the biggest or the strongest. You're looking for something very specific. You're looking for youth. The ideal skin comes from a calf that is only a few weeks, perhaps a few months, old. At this age, the skin is thin, supple, and has a fine, tight grain. An older animal will have a hide that is too thick, too tough, scarred from a longer life. A newborn's is often too delicate, almost paper-thin and prone to tearing during the arduous process to come. You are looking for that perfect window in a young life. As you get closer, you begin your inspection. This is a more intimate process than you might imagine. You run your hand along the calf's back, feeling the texture of its coat, the suppleness of the skin beneath. You are a diamond cutter inspecting a raw stone, looking for the faintest flaw that could mar the final gem. Your biggest enemies are parasites and scars. You part the hair, looking for the telltale bumps of warble fly larvae, which create devastating holes in the finished product. You scan for the scaly patches of ringworm, which create weak spots. You look for nicks from thorny bushes, scrapes from wooden fences, even the healing marks of insect bites. Each tiny imperfection is a potential disaster later on. A single poorly placed scar could force you to discard an entire section of the valuable skin, making the final pages smaller or forcing an awkward cut. This whole process makes picking out the best avocado at the supermarket seem like a simple, stress-free task. This obsessive focus on perfection is what separates the highest quality writing material, vellum, from its more common cousin, parchment. As a mainstream historical fact, the terms are often used interchangeably today. But in the medieval period, there was a crucial distinction. Vellum comes from the old French word vellin, derived from the Latin vitulinum, meaning of a calf. It refers exclusively to this fine calfskin product. Parchment, on the other hand, is a more general term for any animal skin prepared for writing, and it was most commonly made from sheep or goats. Sheepskin, for instance, has a much higher fat content, which can make it greasy and cause ink to bleed if not prepared with extreme care. Goat is tougher, more fibrous. Vellum, however, is the pinnacle. It is the smoothest, the most durable, the most luminous. It is the surface reserved for the most important books, Bibles, books of hours, and royal decrees. You spot a likely candidate, a young bull calf, maybe 6 weeks old, with a uniform, dun-colored coat. Its skin looks clear and unblemished. There's a debate that continues to this day among manuscript specialists. Historians still argue whether the color of an animal's hair follicles left a permanent, ghostly pattern on the finished vellum, or if the intensive scraping and whitening process completely obliterated any trace. Some texts suggest that uniformly colored animals were preferred just in case. As you examine the calf, you're also noting which side is which. The hair side of the finished vellum will always be slightly different from the flesh side, a tiny, quirky detail that book historians or codicologists use to understand how manuscripts were assembled. They can actually map the layout of a book by tracking the subtle differences between the hair and flesh sides of its pages. Having made your choice, you find the farmer. A negotiation begins, a quiet conversation about the price of the animal. This single calf is a significant investment. It's not like you can just pop down to the medieval equivalent of an office supply store if you mess this up. The value of the finished vellum sheets from this one animal could equal a skilled craftsman's wages for several months. The stakes are high. The stake, sadly for the calf, is also high. A price is agreed upon. A nod is exchanged. You mark the chosen calf with a daub of colored chalk on its flank. Your work in the field is done, but the true labor, the slow and messy alchemy of turning this living skin into a vessel for immortal words has only just begun. The first step is complete. The quiet finality of the pasture gives way to a more structured and far less serene environment. You lead the chosen calf from the field, its gentle confusion a stark contrast to the purpose in your stride. Your destination is on the edge of town, a place of stone slabs and sturdy wooden beams situated conveniently near the river. This is the abattoir, the slaughterhouse, a place of grim but necessary work. The air here is different. The sweet scent of grass is replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of blood, and the earthy smell of damp sawdust spread on the floor to soak up spills. The sounds are muted but industrious, the rhythmic thud of a cleaver on a wooden block, the low voices of men at work, the scuff of boots on stone. You are not the butcher. Your craft is different, more patient, but it depends entirely on the skill of the man who works here. The relationship between a parchment maker and a butcher is one of careful professional respect. They are two links in a vital chain of production for the community. The butcher provides food. You provide the substrate for law, for faith, for knowledge. While their trades were distinct and often regulated by different medieval guilds, their work was inextricably linked. You've come to oversee the first and most critical injury your precious material will sustain: its removal. You're essentially the world's most stressed-out project manager, overseeing a very delicate, very organic operation. Micromanaging a butcher with a very large knife is not a career for the faint of heart. The process is swift and practiced. There is no ceremony here, only an economy of motion honed by years of daily repetition. The calf is dispatched with a swiftness that is both brutal and merciful. You watch, your focus entirely on the skin. This is the moment your investment can be ruined. A clumsy flayer, one who is rushed or careless, can leave the hide riddled with nicks and gouges from his knife. These are called flay marks, and they are your nightmare. A small cut can become a gaping hole when the skin is stretched and thinned later. You've explained your needs carefully. You need the hide intact with as few blemishes as possible. The butcher nods, understanding the value of what he's handling. He begins by making precise, shallow cuts around the animal's neck, wrists, and ankles. Then, with a different, rounded knife designed not to cut but to separate, he begins to peel the skin away from the underlying muscle and fat. It's a process that requires surprising strength and an equally surprising delicacy. He works his fists and arms between the layers, pulling the hide away from the carcass with steady, relentless pressure. You watch his blade, wincing internally every time it comes close to the precious outer layer. For the absolute highest quality vellum, the kind destined for a royal charter or an abbot's personal psalter, a quirky but practical trade secret was sometimes employed. The animal would be bled as completely as possible, a technique believed to drain the tiny capillaries within the skin itself. This resulted in a naturally paler, more uniform hide, saving the parchmenter significant effort in the cleaning and whitening stages later on. It was one of the many small, guarded tricks that separated a master from a journeyman. Finally, the hide is free. It's a heavy, warm, shapeless blanket of potential. It steams faintly in the cool air of the slaughterhouse. The butcher and his assistant lift it, and you inspect its fleshy side, running a practiced hand over it to check for the dreaded feel of a cut or the thinness of a scrape. It looks good. Clean. Intact. It looks less like a future page of the Gospels and more like something you'd hastily hide from guests. You pay the butcher for his service, a separate fee from what you paid the farmer for the animal itself. The rest of the calf will go on to feed the town, becoming roasts and stews. Your part, the part nobody wants at the dinner table, is about to begin its long journey to literary stardom. The hide is now yours, but your work is far from a peaceful, scholarly pursuit. You are now in a race against time. As the skin cools, the process of decay begins almost immediately. Bacteria, unseen and relentless, are starting their work. You must get the skin to the next stage as quickly as possible. You and an apprentice fold the heavy, slippery skin, hair side inwards, and load it onto a small cart or simply sling it over your shoulder. It's an awkward, heavy burden, and you have to move with purpose. Historians still argue whether the standard practice was to immediately salt the flesh side of the hide with the salt acting as a temporary preservative, or if a parchmenter working close to a river would simply skip that step and go straight to the initial washing. Salting bought you time, but it was an added expense and another substance that would need to be washed out later. If your workshop is close enough to flowing water, speed is your preservative. The clock is ticking. You leave the noise and smells of the abattoir behind, your mind already on the chilling, cleansing power of the river. The transformation has truly begun. You trudge away from the abattoir, the weight of the fresh hide a heavy, warm pressure on your shoulder. It's a clumsy, unwieldy burden, and with every step, the reality of your task sinks in. The clock is ticking. You follow a well-worn path that slopes down towards the river, a track grooved into the earth by the boots and carts of men in your trade for generations. This is the industrial zone of your medieval town, nestled alongside the lifeblood of the community for a reason. Industries like yours, parchment making, tanning, dyeing, were notoriously thirsty and notoriously messy. Being situated on the riverbank was a practical necessity, providing both an endless supply of water for washing and a convenient, if rather inconsiderate, drain for carrying away the waste. The concept of downstream pollution was someone else's problem. As you get closer, the air changes again. The coppery smell of the slaughterhouse fades, replaced by the damp, loamy scent of the riverbank, the green smell of crushed water plants, and the faint, fishy odor of the slow-moving current. You arrive at your spot, a small, pebbly inlet, where the water runs steadily but not too fast. This is your outdoor washing machine. With a grunt of effort, you swing the heavy hide from your shoulder and heave it into the water. It lands with a heavy splash, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the river's murmur. For a moment, it floats, a dark, shapeless mass, before the water saturates it completely and it sinks slowly to the riverbed, looking like a drowned Wookiee that's had a very, very bad day. It's not exactly inspiring confidence. You don't just leave it there. To keep the current from stealing your expensive investment, you secure it. You might roll a large, heavy boulder onto one edge of it, pinning it firmly to the river bottom, or you might tie a rope through a small slit in its corner and tether it to a thick wooden stake hammered deep into the bank. Now the real work begins. Without hesitation, you hitch up your tunic and wade into the shallows. The shock of the cold water is immediate, seeping into your woolen hose and leather shoes. But you're used to it. This is not a job for those who enjoy being warm and dry. Standing thigh-deep in the current, you begin to agitate the skin. You stomp on it with your feet, the soft, yielding mass squelching under your weight. You bend over, grabbing handfuls of the coarse, hairy coat and scrubbing it against the smooth, worn stones of the riverbed. The goal is simple. Wash off all the surface filth. Clouds of dirt and grime lift from the hide and are instantly whisked away by the water. A steady, pinkish trail of residual blood streams from the skin, a testament to the life that so recently inhabited it. You work methodically, unfolding the skin, turning it over, ensuring every inch is exposed to the cleansing friction of the water and stones. Your goal is to get it from crime scene evidence to merely unpleasantly damp animal hide. It's a small step for the hide, but a giant leap for your chances of not attracting every stray dog in the county. This is grueling physical labor. Your back aches from stooping, and your hands are raw and numb from the cold water. Sometimes, for particularly stubborn patches of dried blood or caked-on dung, you might employ a less pleasant but highly effective trick of the trade. A bucket of stale urine, collected and saved for just such a purpose, could be poured over the hide. The ammonia in the urine is a powerful, naturally occurring detergent that chemically breaks down grease and filth far more effectively than water alone. It's one of the many pieces of folk chemistry, learned through trial and error, that define the craft. Once the initial vigorous scrubbing is done, you might leave the hide submerged for a while longer. Historians still argue whether this prolonged soaking, which could last a full day or even two, was intended solely for deeper cleaning, allowing the water to soften the entire structure of the skin, or if it served a more subtle biological purpose. Some believe this extended bath was a calculated first step in loosening the hair, kickstarting a process of controlled decay, where enzymes and bacteria would begin to break down the proteins in the epidermis, making the dehairing process much easier later on. It was a delicate balance between softening the skin and letting it rot. As you stand back, watching the current tug gently at the submerged hide, you feel a sense of weary satisfaction. The water running off it is finally clear. The first, and arguably filthiest, stage of its purification is complete. As you stand thigh-deep in the cold, rushing water wrestling a bloody animal skin, you can't help but think of all the poets and theologians who will one day write on this material, completely oblivious to the fact that its journey to their desk involved you getting this wet and cold. It's the unglamorous backstory of every great book. The hide is now thoroughly saturated, heavier than ever, and cleansed of its surface impurities. But the hair is still attached, the skin is still raw, and it is still very much a perishable organic object. Its real transformation, the chemical journey that will turn it from skin into vellum, is next. And that journey begins in the lime pit. Hauling the sodden hide from the river is a new kind of struggle. It no longer has the strange, fleshy warmth of a living thing, but it has gained an immense dead weight from the water it has absorbed. It's like carrying a liquid, shapeless boulder. You drape it over your cart or your own aching back and make the short journey from the riverbank to your workshop proper. This is your domain, a place defined not by wood shavings and sawdust, but by stone, water, and chemical alchemy. Your workshop has a very distinct aroma. It's not the romantic smell of old books and leather. It's more high school chemistry experiment meets industrial laundromat. You don't get a lot of casual visitors. The heart of your operation is a series of pits or vats. These might be large, sturdy wooden tubs bound with iron hoops like massive barrels, or they could be more permanent structures, dug into the earth and lined with smooth, tightly fitted stones to make them watertight. Leaning against them are the tools of this stage: long wooden poles with paddle-like ends and heavy lids to cover the vats and keep out rain and debris. Today, your destination is an empty pit, waiting for a fresh batch. You dump the cleaned hide on the stone paving next to it. It lies there in a sloppy heap while you prepare its chemical bath. You are about to engage in a process that has been the cornerstone of this craft for centuries. It's a bit of practical chemistry that turns a raw, decaying hide into a preserved and workable material. You need to make a lime liquor. You start with quicklime calcium oxide, CaO, a crumbly white substance derived from burning limestone in a kiln. You shovel a calculated amount of it into the bottom of the pit. Then you begin to add water. The reaction is immediate and dramatic. The water hits the quicklime with a furious hissing and sizzling. A thick white steam billows up, carrying a sharp, acrid scent. The mixture bubbles and churns as if it were boiling, and you can feel a wave of intense heat radiating from the pit. This is an exothermic reaction, slaking the lime and transforming it into calcium hydroxide, CaOH2, a powerful alkali. This is ancient elemental chemistry, controlled by little more than your own experience and judgment. You continue adding water and stirring with a long pole, creating a milky, opaque solution the consistency of thin paint. The strength of this mixture is a carefully guarded part of your craft. Too weak and the process will be ineffective, leaving the hair stubbornly attached. too strong, and the lime can actually damage the delicate collagen fibers of the skin itself, a phenomenon a parchmenter calls burning the hide, rendering it weak and useless. Once the solution is just right, the real work begins. You push the heavy, waterlogged skin into the pit. It sinks slowly into the thick white liquid. Using your pole, you push it down, folding it and moving it around to ensure the lime liquor penetrates every fold and crevice. You are essentially giving the hide a very long, very aggressive chemical peel. It's a spa day, but instead of cucumber water and soft music, you get a caustic bath and the looming threat of all your hair falling out. The skin will now soak in this alkaline bath for several days, perhaps as long as a week or even more. The time depends on the hide's thickness, the ambient temperature, and the exact composition of your bath. Historians still argue whether the practice of adding other substances to the lime liquor was a widespread technique or a series of local traditions. Some recipes call for the addition of wood ash, particularly from beech trees, which contains potassium hydroxide, another strong alkali that could sharpen or accelerate the process. Others mention adding fermented barley or other plant matter, which might have introduced enzymes to further aid in breaking down the skin's structure. Twice a day, every day, you must attend to the pits. You come out with your pole and slowly, methodically agitate the mixture. This process, called hauling, is crucial. You need to lift and move the submerged skins to prevent the lime from settling and to ensure that all surfaces of the hide are evenly exposed to the chemical action. It's a fantastic job to give to an apprentice you're not particularly fond of. Builds character, they say. Or at least it removes unwanted calluses. In some larger tanneries, apprentices might even have to get into the shallow pits and tread the hides with their feet. A truly miserable task in the cold, slimy, and caustic environment. The lime is performing several crucial tasks at once. Its primary job is to attack the keratin, the protein that makes up the hair and the outer layer of the epidermis. It dissolves the glue holding the hairs in their follicles. Secondly, it saponifies the natural fats and greases within the skin, converting them into a primitive soap that will be washed away, leaving the skin clean and porous. Finally, and most importantly, the high pH of the lime solution kills off the bacteria that cause decay, effectively preserving the hide and pausing the race against time that began at the abattoir. The skin is now stable. Hidden beneath the milky surface, a profound transformation is taking place. The structure is swelling, plumping up with water and fundamentally loosening, preparing itself for the next, much more physical stage of its journey. After a week of silent chemical transformation, the day has come to liberate the hide from its milky prison. You use a long, hooked pole to snag a corner of the submerged skin and begin the arduous task of pulling it out. It comes up with a heavy, liquid slap, dripping the caustic white solution back into the pit. It is profoundly changed. The skin is swollen and plump with a strange, rubbery texture. It is pale, almost translucent in places, and the hair is visibly loosened, looking patchy and sad. You haul it over to a rinsing trough or a clean section of the stone paving, where you douse it with several buckets of fresh water, washing away the surface lime and making it slightly less hazardous to handle. Your next station is the beam. This is one of the most iconic and ancient pieces of equipment in your trade. It's a massive, heavy log or plank set at a steep angle, with its top surface worn into a smooth, convex curve from centuries of use. It's a simple, perfect design that provides the ideal surface for the hard physical labor to come. With a grunt, you lift the heavy, slippery hide and drape it over the beam, hair side up. It slumps into place, its weight holding it steady. Now, you pick up your tool. It's a long, heavy knife with a wooden handle at each end. But the blade has no sharp edge. It is intentionally, crucially blunt. Your goal is to scrape, not to cut. A single accidental slice at this stage would be a disaster. You lean your body weight into the beam, planting your feet firmly. You place the dull edge of the blade against the highest point of the curved hide, and you push. It's a long, downward stroke, using your arms, your shoulders, and your core. This is a full-body workout. Forget joining a gym. A few hours on the deherring beam and you'll have arms and shoulders that could win a tavern brawl. It's the original paleo fitness plan. The result of that first push is immediate and deeply satisfying. The lime has performed its magic perfectly. The hair, along with the entire outer layer of the skin, the epidermis, sloughs off in a single, continuous, slimy sheet. It's a foul-smelling, gooey mess of degraded keratin and lime, which you periodically shove off the end of the beam onto the floor. You work with a steady, practiced rhythm. Scrape, lift, reposition the hide, scrape again. You move methodically across the entire surface, overlapping your strokes, ensuring not a single hair remains. The skin beneath is a pale, creamy white. It has the color and approximate texture of a very large, very pale calamari steak. If you squint, you can almost start to see something resembling a future page. Almost. Mostly it just looks like a monster's laundry. Once the hair side is completely denuded, you flip the hide over. The process is repeated on the flesh side, a task called, appropriately, fleshing. Here you are removing any last stubborn remnants of fat, meat, or the fine membrane that once connected the skin to the muscle beneath. This side needs to be just as clean as the other. The slimy pile of waste on the floor grows larger, but this gunk isn't always just discarded. In the resourceful world of medieval craft, everything has a potential use. The collected hair, once washed, could be sold to plasterers, who would mix it into their lime plaster to act as a binding agent, a primitive fiberglass that helped prevent the walls from cracking. The fatty, gelatinous scrapings could be boiled down in a great cauldron to produce a low-grade tallow for cheap candles or a sticky, smelly glue. Nothing was truly wasted. When your scraping is done, the hide is given another thorough washing in fresh water. This is to rinse away all the gunk you've just scraped off, but also to begin washing out the lime that has soaked deep into the skin's fibrous structure. Historians still argue whether this deliming process was sometimes chemically accelerated. Some evidence suggests that parchment makers might have soaked the hide in a slightly acidic bath, perhaps made from fermented bran or stale beer, to actively neutralize the alkalinity of the lime. Getting the pH balance right was critical. Too much residual lime could make the final vellum brittle. Congratulations, you've successfully given your calfskin a full-body exfoliation and shave. What you are left with is a pale, hairless, and utterly clean sheet of pure, raw collagen. In the leather trade, this is now called a pelt. It is the fundamental building block of your final product. It bears little resemblance to the furry skin you started with, but it's also not yet vellum. It is a floppy, sodden, and entirely shapeless thing. It has no tension, no form, no flatness. Your next job is to fight its very nature, to stretch it, dry it, and force it to become something it was never meant to be. A perfect, paper-thin, luminous sheet. And that can only be done on the frame. Your pelt is now chemically pure, but it is physically shapeless. It is a pale, flaccid sheet of potential, and your next task is to impose order upon it, to give it the flat, uniform geometry of a future page. You carry the dripping pelt from the washing trough to another part of your workshop, a covered area open to the air but protected from the rain. Here the most important tools of your trade are waiting, the stretching frames. They are called hearses, and they are simple but ingenious contraptions of sturdy timber, usually rectangular, standing vertically against the wall or on their own built-in legs. The wooden beams of the frames are punctuated every few inches by stout wooden pegs that can be twisted and tightened. You lay one of these frames flat on a pair of trestles. Then, you and an apprentice unceremoniously splat the wet pelt onto it. It lies in the middle like a deflated water balloon, a puddle of pale collagen. The challenge now is to attach this soft, easily torn skin to the rigid frame in a way that can withstand enormous tension. You can't use nails or clamps, they would rip through the skin as soon as you started to pull. Instead, you rely on a clever, low-tech solution that distributes the force. You begin by creating the anchor points. This process involves wrapping dozens of little skin and pebble burritos all around the edge of the hide. It's tedious work, requiring more patience than explaining a new board game to your family. Here is how you do it. You take a small, smooth, water-worn pebble, no bigger than your thumb. You place this pebble on the flesh side of the pelt, about an inch in from the scalloped edge. Then from the other side, the hair side, you pinch the skin around the pebble, creating a little knob. You then take a short, strong piece of cord and wrap it tightly in the groove you've created beneath the pebble, cinching it with a practiced knot. The pebble, now securely encased in a little pouch of skin, becomes a toggle. It's an anchor that cannot pull through. You repeat this process every 4 or 5 inches all the way around the irregular perimeter of the skin. It's a slow, meticulous task, but it is the foundation for everything that comes next. Once the entire edge of the skin is studded with these corded toggles, you begin lacing it to the frame. You take the free end of each cord and loop it around one of the adjustable pegs on the hearse. At first, you just attach them loosely, getting the whole system rigged up. The skin still sags in the middle of the frame, but now the magic begins. You take up a wooden lever or a simple wrench that fits over the pegs. You start at one corner, giving the peg a turn, tightening the cord. The skin pulls just a little bit. Then you move to the opposite corner and do the same, then the other 2 corners. You work diagonally, then side to side, top to bottom, like you're tuning a giant, very damp drum. With each turn of a peg, the tension builds. The floppy, sagging sheet begins to lift. The wrinkles and folds smooth out. You move around the frame again and again, a little bit of tightening here, a little bit there, always working to keep the pressure even. You can feel the change under your fingertips. The skin becomes taut, resonant. If you tap it, it gives a dull thud that slowly becomes a higher, tighter note as the stretching continues. The technology of the hearse is what makes Vellum possible. As you stretch the wet skin, you are pulling its microscopic collagen fibers, forcing them out of their natural, chaotic, interwoven state and aligning them into flat, parallel layers. This structural realignment, which will be locked in by the drying process, is what will give the vellum its strength, its smoothness, and its uniquely brilliant surface. Without this frame, all you would create is a shriveled, horny, useless piece of rawhide. As you work, you can see the light from the workshop window begin to shine through the stretched skin. It glows. Slowly, the sad, flabby pelt begins to look like something with purpose. It goes from failed biology experiment to abstract art installation. It's progress. While most frames were rectangular to create pages with minimal waste, historians still argue whether the circular frames seen in some earlier manuscript illustrations were a more primitive design or a specialized tool. A circular frame distributes tension more perfectly, potentially creating a more uniform product, but a rectangular frame is far more practical for the rectangular needs of a book. The eventual dominance of the rectangle was likely a simple matter of economics and efficiency. Finally, the skin is stretched to its absolute limit, a semi-transparent sheet, humming with tension. It is a canvas awaiting its final touches, a drumhead pulled tight before the performance. It is still wet, still vulnerable, but for the first time, it has the flat, plainer quality of a page. It is now ready for the scraping knife. The skin is now a captive on the hearse, stretched taut and gleaming with moisture. It is a prepared canvas, waiting for the artist's touch. But you are not yet an artist with a pen. You are a sculptor with a blade. You now pick up the most iconic and specialized tool of your trade, the one that truly separates the parchmenter from the tanner. It is called the linellum, and it is beautiful in its functional simplicity. It's a crescent-shaped blade, a sliver of sharpened steel like a smiling moon, with a wooden handle fixed to its center. You hold this handle with both hands, giving you perfect balance and control. The curved edge of the blade is sharp, but not like a razor. It's an edge designed for shaving and scraping, not for slicing. Approaching the frame, you stand so the light from the door or a high window falls across the surface of the skin, revealing every subtle contour, every slight variation in thickness. This requires the steady hands of a surgeon and the patience of someone waiting for a software update to finish. One wrong move, one sharp dig with the corner of the blade, and your beautiful taut canvas becomes a very expensive, very holy-looking piece of Swiss cheese. You place the center of the curved blade against the damp skin, and you pull it towards you in a long, smooth, deliberate stroke. The sound it makes is incredibly satisfying. It's a high, crisp, singing scrape, a shing that is the signature sound of your workshop. It's the sound of transformation. If you could bottle that sound, you could sell it to stressed-out monks. With that one stroke, a fine, pulpy shaving of the skin surface is lifted away. You are not removing large amounts of material, you are shaving off microns. You are leveling the surface. An animal's skin is not naturally uniform. The hide over the strong muscles of the back and rump is thicker than the soft, pliable skin of the belly and flanks. Your job now is to impose an unnatural uniformity upon it, to create a perfectly even thickness from edge to edge. You work in a methodical pattern, overlapping your strokes, moving across the entire surface of the skin. You can feel the high spots through the blade, the subtle resistance telling you where more work is needed. With each pass, the lunellum not only shaves the skin but also squeezes water out of it. You can see a fine bead of moisture forming in front of the blade as you push, forcing the liquid out from between the collagen fibers. This physical removal of water is a crucial part of the drying process. You are not just waiting for it to evaporate, you are actively expelling it. Like many master craftsmen, you likely have more than one lunellum. A newer, sharper blade might be used for the first few passes, efficiently removing the bulk of the unevenness. But for the final, finishing strokes, you might switch to an older, more worn blade whose edge has been polished smooth through years of use. This finer tool burnishes the surface as it scrapes, creating a smoother, more compressed finish. You work on both sides of the sheet. After finishing one side, you go around the frame and begin the process anew on the other. Historians still argue whether the flesh side or the hair side was the preferred surface for the scribe. The flesh side, the inner side of the skin, is naturally smoother and tends to be a brighter, more uniform white. The hair side often retains a faint, ghostly pattern of the hair follicles and can be slightly more yellow or grayish. For the most luxurious manuscripts, scribes would often arrange their pages so that a flesh side page would always face another flesh side, and a hair side would face a hair side. This created a pleasing uniform color across any two-page spread that you opened. You're not just scraping a skin anymore. You are sculpting a page. You are taking a biological object and turning it into a piece of refined technology, a perfect substrate for ink. You pause, stepping back to look at your work. You run your hand over the surface, feeling for any roughness. You might even hold a candle or your own hand behind the sheet, using the light to check for any thick or thin spots, which show up as darker or brighter patches. The skin is now dramatically thinner, smoother, and more translucent than it was just an hour ago. With every pass of the blade, you are bringing it one step closer to its destiny, which for now is mostly just to hang there and get even drier. The hard physical shaping is done. Now comes the most passive and perhaps most nerve-wracking part of the process: the drying. Awaiting continue, the high-pitched song of the lunellum fades into silence. The physical, aggressive shaping of the skin is over. You stand back from the hearse, your arms aching slightly, and survey your work. The skin is a pale, taut, semi-transparent sheet, stretched to its absolute limit, gleaming with the moisture you haven't yet managed to scrape or squeeze out. Now begins the most passive, yet in many ways the most challenging phase of the entire process. Your role shifts from one of active, intense labor to one of quiet, anxious vigilance. You must now manage the drying. Your job title has officially changed from artisan scraper to professional worrier. You spend your days glancing nervously at the sky, sniffing the air for changes in humidity, and generally acting like a farmer during a drought. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. You move the frame to a designated spot in your workshop, a place with good, gentle air circulation, but crucially out of the direct rays of the sun and far from the radiant heat of any hearth or fire. Direct heat is your enemy. It would dry the skin far too quickly, shrinking it violently and almost certainly causing it to tear. The goal is a slow, even, and profoundly gradual release of the remaining water molecules trapped within the collagen fibers. This gentle drying process is what will permanently lock those fibers into the flat, parallel structure you created by stretching them. If you were to simply cut the pelt from the frame while it was wet and leave it in a pile, it would shrink and contort as it dried, becoming a stiff, horny, useless piece of rawhide. The combination of tension and slow drying is the secret alchemy at the heart of your craft. You become a keen observer of your local weather. A perfect drying day is mild, slightly overcast with a steady, gentle breeze. A week of such days is a gift. But the weather is fickle. A sudden hot, dry wind from the east could spell disaster, sucking the moisture from the skin's surface too fast, creating a hardened outer layer while the inside is still damp. This differential shrinkage creates unbearable stress. Conversely, a long spell of damp, stagnant, rainy weather is just as bad. It slows the drying to a crawl, inviting the ghostly bloom of mold and mildew to take root on your precious surface. In damper climates, some workshops might have been built with adjustable vents or slats in the walls, a kind of primitive climate control system that allowed the master to manage the airflow. As the hours turn into days, you watch the skin perform its final magic trick, turning from a semi-transparent, ghost-like membrane into something solid and brilliantly opaque. It's like watching a Polaroid develop in extremely slow motion, if the Polaroid was made from a cow. The areas that dry first turn a milky, brilliant white. You watch this whitening process creep across the surface, hoping it does so evenly, like a tide coming in. Any patch that remains stubbornly translucent and gray is a sign of trouble, a spot that isn't drying properly. But your job isn't just watching. You must also manage the incredible tension. As the skin dries and its fibers lock into place, it shrinks with immense power. The skin is now pulling on the frame with the force of a very angry, very strong ghost. The stout wooden frame groans under the strain. The pegs creak in their sockets. The lacing cords are pulled bar-taut. You must constantly check this tension. If it becomes too extreme, you may need to carefully, almost imperceptibly, loosen the pegs, giving the skin just a millimeter of slack to relieve the pressure and prevent a catastrophic tear. Then, as the drying continues, you may need to re-tighten them to ensure the skin remains perfectly flat. It is a delicate, continuous dialogue with the material. Historians still argue whether the ideal drying time was a matter of a few days, or if a much slower process, lasting a week or more, was considered superior. A faster drying time was more economically efficient, allowing for greater turnover. But many artisans may have believed that a slower, more patient drying resulted in a more stable, relaxed, and ultimately higher quality vellum that was less prone to warping with changes in humidity later in its life. Finally, after several days of your careful stewardship, the transformation is complete. You run your hand across the surface. It is no longer damp or cool, it is dry, stiff, and smooth. You tap it with your fingernail, and it responds with a sharp, resonant tuck, like a drumhead. It is a uniform, opaque, creamy white. It is no longer a pelt. It is now finally a raw, untrimmed sheet of vellum, ready to be cut from the frame that has been its cradle and its rack. The slow, agonizing wait is over. The foundation is set. Now the finishing can begin. The frame stands in the quiet air of the workshop, holding its treasure, a finished raw sheet of vellum. It is stiff, opaque, and resonant. By any standard, it is a success, a testament to your skill and patience. It's a fine piece of work, ready to become part of a sturdy legal document or a parish Bible. But as you admire it, your mind drifts to the whispers and legends of your trade, to a category of material so fine, so luxurious, that it exists on the boundary between craft and myth. You think about uterine vellum. The name itself is stark, even a little unsettling. Uterine vellum, or slunk vellum as it's sometimes called, refers to parchment supposedly made from the skin of a fetal or stillborn calf, lamb, or kid. This was not the kind of vellum you'd use to write down your grocery list or a tavern song. This was the material for showing off. It was the medieval equivalent of a diamond-encrusted smartphone case, utterly impractical, wildly expensive, and designed to make other people jealous of your prayer book. This was the vellum reserved for the most treasured of all manuscripts, the exquisitely small books of hours for queens and duchesses, or the impossibly detailed pocket Bibles, carried by wealthy university students and friars in the 13th century. The physical qualities of this legendary material were said to be extraordinary. It was impossibly thin and supple, with a surface as smooth and flawless as polished ivory. It lacked any of the minor imperfections that even the finest normal vellum might have. No visible hair follicles, no variation in color, no scars from an animal's life in the field. It was the theoretical ideal of a writing surface, a substance so pure it seemed almost ethereal. The very act of preparing such a delicate, paper-thin skin would have required the utmost skill, a process where every single step we've discussed would need to be performed with an almost supernatural delicacy. But did it really exist in the way the stories suggest? Historians still argue whether uterine vellum was a standard, if rare product derived from the deliberate harvesting of animal fetuses. The debate is a fierce one. On one side, the sheer number of surviving manuscripts made on this impossibly fine material suggests a somewhat regular supply. On the other side, the economics are questionable. A pregnant cow was an incredibly valuable asset for its milk and for its potential to produce more offspring. To slaughter such an animal merely for the tiny, delicate hide of its unborn calf seems wasteful and economically foolish. It is far more likely that these skins were an opportunistic byproduct, harvested from animals that had miscarried, were stillborn, or were found to be pregnant only after being slaughtered for meat. Some scholars propose another theory, that the term uterine vellum was not a literal description of the source, but a kind of brand name, a trade term for the highest grade of product a workshop could produce. It might have referred to the skin of a very young newborn animal, prepared with extra care. Or perhaps it was simply any normal calf skin that a master craftsman, through sheer skill, had managed to scrape and process to an extraordinary and unnatural thinness. The name in this case would have been more about marketing than biology, a way to signify the absolute pinnacle of luxury. Modern science has entered the fray, but even it has struggled to provide a definitive answer. Researchers can now take microscopic samples from medieval books and use a technique called peptide mass fingerprinting to identify the species of animal the vellum came from. But determining the precise age of the animal, differentiating between a late-term fetus and a one-day-old newborn, for example, is far more difficult. So, was uterine vellum a real thing? Scholars have been arguing about it for decades. It's the "did Shakespeare write his own plays?" of the manuscript world, a debate that's fascinating, full of passionate opinions, and probably will never be solved to everyone's satisfaction. One quirky and tantalizing alternative to this whole debate is the rumored technique of skin splitting. Some medieval sources contain cryptic references to a method of splitting a limed sheepskin into two separate layers. While modern leather is often split by powerful machines, the idea of doing this by hand with a long, specialized blade would have been an act of almost unimaginable skill. It's the sort of task that sounds like a tall tale a master parchmenter would tell his apprentices. Back in my day, we didn't just scrape skins, we split them in two, uphill, in the snow. Yet if it were possible, it would provide a way to create two incredibly thin sheets from a single, normal skin. Your mind returns to the solid, tangible reality of the vellum sheet in front of you. It may not be the stuff of legend, but it is real, and it is ready for the next stage. Its surface is dry and hard, but it has a slick, almost greasy feel to it. Ink would bead and blotch on this surface. It is not yet ready to write on. Its journey from skin to sheet is over, but its preparation as a page has just begun. Your brief detour into the world of legendary vellum is over. You stand before the solid, real-world result of your labor. The stiff, dry sheet of calfskin still held tight in its wooden frame. The time has come to set it free. With a sharp knife, you move around the hearse, not cutting the precious vellum itself, but slicing through the taut lacing cords one by one. With each soft thwip of a cut cord, a little bit of tension is released. When the last cord is severed, the sheet is free. It is no longer a work in progress, but a distinct object. You lift it from the frame. It is stiff and holds its flat shape, though the edges may curl slightly, remembering the pull of the frame. You carry this new creation over to a large, smooth, clean wooden workbench and lay it flat. You run your hand over its surface. It feels smooth, hard, and almost cool to the touch. It is a minor miracle of transformation, but it is not yet ready for a scribe. Right now, the vellum has the texture of a high-end laminate countertop. The process of scraping with the lunellum while it was wet has burnished and compressed the surface fibers into a slick, non-porous layer. It's great if you want to spill something on it, but terrible if you want to write the word of God. Ink would just sit on the surface, refusing to sink in, beating up into little droplets, or once dry, flaking off at the slightest touch. The page has no tooth. Your job is to give it some. This next process is called pouncing. It is in essence a way to gently rough up the surface on a microscopic level, creating a fine, velvety nap that will welcome the ink. Your primary tool for this is pumice, a magical rock born from the fire of volcanoes. You have a lump of it on your bench, grayish-white, surprisingly light for its size and riddled with tiny air pockets. It's a piece of a mountain from some distant fiery land like Sicily or the Lipari Islands, brought to your workshop via the winding, patient trade routes that crisscross Europe. You take a metal scraper and rub it against the lump of pumice, creating a small pile of fine, gritty white powder. Then you begin to prepare the page. You dust a small amount of the powder onto the vellum, taking a soft leather pad, a piece of felt, or just the calloused palm of your hand. You begin to rub the powder into the surface in slow, deliberate, circular motions. You are basically giving the page a microscopic sandpapering. It's the final stage of exfoliation in its long and punishing spa treatment. After this, it will have pores that are the envy of every other writing surface in the monastery. The sound is a soft, whispery scratching, the only noise in the focused quiet of the workshop. You don't apply too much pressure. You are not trying to remove material or thin the page any further. You are simply changing its texture, breaking up that hard, slick surface. You are creating tens of thousands of microscopic hills and valleys that will grip the nib of the quill and draw the ink from it through capillary action. While pumice was the ideal material, a true gift from geology, craftsmen were resourceful. In regions where volcanic rock was unobtainable, a similar effect could be achieved with other fine abrasives, like powdered cuttlefish bone or the fine ash from calcined animal bones. You work your way across the entire sheet, ensuring the texture is uniform. You can feel the difference immediately. The surface loses its greasy slickness and takes on a soft, velvety, matte finish. It feels warmer, more organic to the touch. When you're satisfied with the first side, you carefully flip the large, stiff sheet over and repeat the entire process on the other side. Both sides of the vellum must be prepared to receive the scribe's work. Finally, with a soft cloth or a brush made from goose feathers, you meticulously dust off every last grain of the excess pumice powder. The sheet lies on your bench, transformed once more. You brush away the dust, and the surface is changed. It now feels thirsty. It feels like it's waiting for ink. It has gone from being a beautiful object to being a useful one, which is a significant promotion in the workshop. The question of what powder to use, however, is a subtle one. Historians still argue whether the pouncing with an abrasive like pumice and the subsequent step of whitening with a powder like chalk were always two distinct stages, or if they were often combined into a single process with the craftsman using their own preferred mixture of abrasive and whitener at the same time to save a step. For now, you have given the page its tooth. The next step is to give it its final, brilliant complexion. The vellum sheet lies before you on the workbench, its surface now bearing the fine, velvety tooth from the pumice. It is receptive, ready for ink, but it is not yet perfect. Its color is a natural, creamy off-white, an echo of the living creature it once was. But for the grand and holy purpose for which it is destined, it needs to be brighter. Your goal now is to take it from manila folder to blinding Arctic snow. Scribes and their patrons prized a brilliant, high-contrast page, and it is your job to provide it. This final surface treatment is the step that will give the vellum its quintessential luminous glow. This is the makeup phase of the operation. You're applying a fine finishing powder to hide any tiny blemishes and create a perfect complexion. It's like a foundation coat, but for scripture. You have a stone pot on your shelf filled with your whitening agent of choice. Most commonly, this is simple chalk, calcium carbonate, ground to an impossibly fine powder and sieved through a piece of fine cloth to remove any lumps or impurities. For an even finer finish, some might use powdered gypsum. And for the most luxurious top-tier jobs, a small amount of toxic but brilliantly opaque lead white might be mixed in, a trade secret for producing the most dazzling pages. You take a pinch of the soft white chalk dust and sprinkle it lightly across the surface of the vellum. Then you take up your tool for applying it. This is not the abrasive pad you used for the pumice. This is something much softer, designed to polish, not to cut. It might be a piece of buttery soft, clean leather, or even better, a piece of sheepskin with the wool still attached, which acts as a perfect, gentle buffer. With this soft pad, You begin to work the white powder into the page in the same slow, circular motions as before. The experience is entirely different. There is no scratching sound, only the faintest whisper of the wool passing over the surface. The goal here is not to abrade, but to fill. The fine chalk particles settle into the microscopic valleys and grip onto the tiny fibers you raised with the pumice. This action does two things at once. First, it fills the grain, creating a surface that is even smoother to the quill's nib, allowing for a more controlled and fluid line of ink. Second, and more obviously, it dramatically whitens the page. The fine layer of white particles enhances the sheet's opacity and gives it a brilliant, uniform, cool white finish. You are careful not to leave a thick, dusty layer on top. The goal is to work the powder into the very fabric of the surface. After you have rubbed it in thoroughly, you take another, perfectly clean and dry piece of soft cloth and gently buff the entire sheet. This removes any loose powder, leaving behind a surface that is smooth, bright, and dry to the touch, with no chalky residue coming off on your fingers. How much powder was supposed to remain, however, is a subtle point of contention. Historians still argue whether the ideal was an almost invisible coating, where the chalk served only to brighten and fill the pores, or if some scribes preferred a more substantial, almost gesso-like ground that created a distinct layer between the vellum and the ink, which could be particularly useful for complex illumination. This finishing powder was so essential that it wasn't just used by you, the parchmenter. Scribes themselves kept a small pouch of it, often called a pounce bag, at their writing desks. Even on the most perfectly prepared page, the natural oils from a scribe's hand resting on the vellum could create a greasy spot that would repel ink. A quick dab and rub with their pounce bag would absorb the oil and restore the page's receptiveness. It was the scribe's equivalent of chalking a cue stick, a small but vital ritual to ensure a perfect result. When you are finished, you stand back. The transformation is complete. The sheet of vellum is now a luminous, brilliant white. It is impossibly smooth to the touch, yet you know that on a microscopic level, it is perfectly prepared to receive the pen. The page is now so white and smooth, you're almost afraid to touch it. It looks perfect, pristine, and frankly a little intimidating. It's ready for words, and you hope the scribe who gets it has good handwriting. Your work as the preparer of the raw material is done. The vellum is now a finished product, ready to be sold. But it is still in its natural animal shape, a large, irregular sheet. Before it can become a book, it must be tamed by geometry. It must be cut. The vellum lies on your workbench, a large, stiff, luminous sheet. It is a thing of beauty, the culmination of weeks of hard, messy, and skilled labor. But in its current form, it is still a wild thing. Its edges follow the organic, irregular outline of the animal it came from. It is a map of a creature, with the memory of a spine, of flanks, of a neck still visible in its shape. To become part of a book, this natural form must be conquered by the strict rational logic of geometry. Your task now is to transform this one-of-a-kind skin into a set of perfectly identical rectangular sheets. You are now a medieval Tetris master, but instead of falling blocks, you're fitting perfect rectangles onto an irregularly shaped cowhide. And if you mess up, you can't just hit restart. The pressure is on. This is a game of optimization. Your raw material is incredibly valuable, and your goal is to produce the maximum number of usable pages with the absolute minimum of waste. Before you make a single cut, you plan. You take a piece of chalk or a charcoal stick and lightly survey your territory. You look for any tiny remaining flaws. A small dark spot where a follicle didn't scrape perfectly clean. A thin area you can only see when the light hits it just right. You must plan your cuts to isolate these flaws in the margins, or better yet, in the scraps that will be cut away entirely. The size and shape of your rectangles are dictated by the commission. Is this vellum destined to become a grand lectern Bible, with pages 1.5 feet tall? Or is it for a small, intimate book of hours, designed to be held in a noble lady's hands? For this project, let's say you are preparing pages for a mid-sized gospel book. The fundamental unit you will create is the bifolium. This is a single large rectangle of vellum that will eventually be folded in half to form 2 leaves, which is 4 pages of the book. The entire structure of a medieval book is built upon these folded sheets. With your measurements decided, You take up a long, heavy straight edge and a sharp pointed awl. You lay the straight edge across the vellum and, with firm, steady pressure, you score a long, straight line into the surface. The awl leaves a faint, almost invisible groove, a guideline for your knife that won't mar the page with ink or graphite. You lay out your entire grid this way, mapping out your bifolia. Historians still argue whether this was a truly mathematical process where a pre-calculated cutting diagram was used to ensure maximum efficiency, or if it was a more intuitive art, with the craftsmen simply using their experienced eye to fit in as many good rectangles as they could. Once the entire sheet is scored with your planned cuts, you take a deep breath and pick up your cutting knife. This is a different tool from your other blades. It is not a scraper. It is lethally sharp, with a fine pointed tip. Making that first cut into the perfect finished surface is always a little nerve-wracking. It's like making the first slice into a pristine, beautifully decorated cake. There's no going back. You place your heavy straight edge along the first scored line, using it as a guide and a clamp. You press the tip of your knife into the vellum and draw it towards you in one smooth, continuous motion. The sound is a crisp, clean shick as the blade parts the stiff fibers. You need a steady hand, keeping the blade perfectly vertical to create a clean, square edge. One by one, you liberate the perfect geometric bifolia from the wild, organic sheet. As you work, a pile of scraps and offcuts begins to accumulate around you. These leftover strips and scalloped edges are far from useless. They look like the world's most expensive, least appetizing jigsaw puzzle. But in a world where nothing is wasted, these have their own destiny. The smaller, cleaner pieces will be used for writing exercises, for small legal documents, for the reinforcing strips in book bindings. The rest, the unusable odds and ends, will be swept into a bucket. Later, these holy scraps will be unceremoniously boiled in a great pot of water, slowly rendering down into a thick, sticky, and incredibly strong parchment glue, an essential adhesive for bookbinders and artists. From potential scripture to stationary adhesive, it's a bit of a demotion, but a useful one. Finally, your work is done. The single unique skin has been sacrificed. In its place lies a neat, uniform stack of pristine rectangular bifolia. All traces of the animal are gone, replaced by the clean lines and right angles of human intention. These sheets are the building blocks of the book, the blank canvas upon which a new world of text and image will be built. They are now ready for the scribe. But even the most skilled writer cannot produce a straight line of text on a blank page. The pages first need to be ruled. Your stack of perfect white bifolia represents the pinnacle of the parchmenter's art. The journey from the living field to this neat pile of potential pages is complete. But for the next stage, the role changes. The setting shifts from the messy, elemental workshop of the Pergamentarius to the quiet, clean, and scholarly environment of the scriptorium. You are now the scribe, or perhaps an assistant, tasked with the page's final preparation. Before a single word of scripture or philosophy can be written, you must impose a final, invisible order upon this blank canvas. You must give it lines. An unruled page is a wilderness. Even the steadiest hand cannot produce a page of straight, evenly spaced text without a guide. The architecture of the medieval page, its sense of harmony and order, is built upon a hidden framework, a grid that you are about to create. This is the part of the job where being a perfectionist is a requirement, not a character flaw. If your lines aren't straight, the scribe's prayers and psalms will look like they're slowly sliding off the page. God apparently appreciates good kerning. The process begins not with ruling, but with pricking. You take a small group of bifolia, perhaps 4 or 5 sheets that will be folded and nested together to form a single choir or gathering. You stack them perfectly, one on top of the other, and place them on a soft surface like a corkboard or a thick piece of leather. With a set of dividers and a ruler, you meticulously measure out the page layout. You decide the width of the margins, top, bottom, inside, and outside, and the space between each line of text. Historians still argue whether these proportions were derived from complex geometric constructions, with some scholars finding evidence of the golden ratio and other secret canons of design, or if scribes used simpler, more practical systems of whole number ratios to create their elegant and harmonious layouts. Once your measurements are marked along the edges, you take up your awl. It's a simple tool, a sharp steel point like a needle set into a wooden handle. At each mark you've made, you press the awl down firmly, pricking a tiny, neat hole that passes through the entire stack of vellum sheets. You work your way down the outer and inner margins, creating 2 parallel sets of pinpricks. By pricking the whole quire at once, you guarantee that the guidelines on every single page within that gathering will be in the exact same position, ensuring a uniform look throughout the book. Now that the sheets are pricked, you can begin to rule them. You take a single bifolium and lay it open on your desk. The tiny pinpricks are your guides for a microscopic connect-the-dots puzzle. You place your heavy ruler or straight edge on the page, carefully aligning its edge between a prick on the left and its corresponding partner on the right. Then you take up your ruling tool. For this task, you are using a metal stylus, perhaps made of silver or lead. You draw the point along the edge of the ruler with a steady pressure. It doesn't deposit much visible material, but it leaves a faint, shimmering gray line on the vellum. This method of ruling with a metal point became common in the High Middle Ages, and it's a key detail that manuscript experts use to date documents. Earlier scribes often used a blind ruling, where a blunt point, like a polished piece of bone, was used to press a furrow into the page, creating a colorless groove that could be seen but was less obtrusive. You work your way down the page, connecting each pair of pricks to create the horizontal lines for the text. Then you rule the vertical bounding lines that define the left and right sides of the text block. When you are finished, you hold the page up and tilt it towards the light from the tall scriptorium window. The invisible grid of lines suddenly shimmers into view. It's like a secret code embedded in the page, a hidden architecture that will support the beautiful writing to come. It's the most satisfying and most invisible art form. The bifolium is no longer a blank page. It is a prepared field, furrowed and ready for planting. Every line is perfectly parallel, every margin perfectly proportioned. This underlying grid is the silent partner in the creation of every magnificent manuscript. It is the foundation of order upon which the scribe will build their art. Now and only now is it truly time to write. The page is waiting, the quill and ink are ready. The ruled page lies waiting on the slanted surface of your writing desk, a silent testament to weeks of labor. The scriptorium is quiet, filled with the soft, diffused light from a tall, arched window. The air smells of old wood, melting beeswax from a distant candle, and the faint, dry scent of the vellum itself. All the monumental effort of the farmer, the butcher, and the parchmenter has led to this moment, to this clean and ordered space. The physical creation of the canvas is complete. Now, the tools of the artist, the scribe, are called forth. Before you are 2 objects, the humble but essential instruments of your craft, the quill and the ink. They seem simple, but each is the product of specific knowledge and careful preparation. Let's start with the quill. You don't just grab any old feather dropped by a passing bird. This isn't arts and crafts hour. The ideal writing tool comes from the 5 or 6 primary flight feathers of a large bird, with the goose being the most common and reliable source. Its feathers are large, strong, and flexible. For more luxurious work, a swan's feather might be used. For incredibly fine, delicate lines, a crow's. You select a feather from the bird's left wing, as you are right-handed. The natural curve of a left wing feather arcs away from your hand, giving you a clear view of the line you are writing. For a left-handed scribe, a right wing feather would be preferred. The raw feather, however, is not ready to be used. It is too soft, and its tip would wear down in moments. It must first be dressed. The first step is hardening. You have a pot of fine, clean sand which has been heated over a brazier. You plunge the barrel of the feather into the hot sand for a few moments. The heat drives out the natural oils and moisture, making the keratin of the quill barrel hard, durable, and slightly brittle, like a fingernail. Once it has cooled, the true art begins. Your most important tool, aside from the quill itself, is your penknife. Its entire purpose in life is to cut and shape quills. This is its moment to shine. Any other use, like actually opening a parcel, is strictly secondary. With this small, razor-sharp blade, you begin to sculpt the tip. First, you make a rough, angled cut to remove the very end. Then you carefully carve away the sides, creating a tapering point. The crucial step is the slit. You press the very tip of your knife into the center of the nib and create a fine vertical slit, perhaps half an inch long. This slit is the quill's heart. It acts as a tiny ink reservoir, and it allows the two halves of the nib, the tines, to flex under pressure, enabling the thick and thin strokes that are the hallmark of calligraphy. Finally, you place the nib on a hard block of wood or bone and make the final, flat cut across the tip. The width and angle of this cut define the character of your script. A broad, straight cut is needed for the bold, vertical strokes of a Gothic script, while a sharper, more angled cut would be for a lighter, faster hand. Historians still argue whether the complex art of cutting a quill was a skill passed down through a formal, structured apprenticeship with set exercises and diagrams, or if it was learned more informally through years of quiet observation and trial and error within the scriptorium. The near-total lack of early medieval how-to guides on this fundamental skill means we can only guess at how this vital knowledge was transmitted. Next to your freshly cut quill sits your ink, and then there's the ink, a dark, potent, slightly smelly liquid in a pot. It's the lifeblood of the whole operation, the stuff that turns all this animal and vegetable matter into pure, lasting information. No pressure, ink. It sits in an ink horn, a small well made of ceramic, glass, or a hollowed-out animal horn, often with a lid to prevent it from evaporating and to keep out dust. This is not the simple water-based ink you might imagine. This is iron gall ink, the standard writing fluid of the medieval world for 1,000 years. Its color is a deep, velvety black when fresh, and it is remarkably permanent. On your desk, you have a few other essential items. There's a small lump of pumice for smoothing any rough spots you might find on the vellum, and your pricker and ruler for any last-minute layout adjustments. You also have another knife, distinct from your penknife. This one is for erasing. It's not a rubber eraser, of course. This sharp blade is for the painstaking process of scraping a mistake off the page, a delicate surgery on the vellum surface that you hope you won't have to perform too often. All your tools are ready. The page is ruled, the quill is cut, the ink is waiting. The silence of the scriptorium deepens and the moment of creation is at hand. The quill is cut, the page is ruled, but the third member of this holy trinity, the ink, is not a simple thing to be taken for granted. It does not appear by magic. It must be made, or brewed, through a process that is equal parts kitchen recipe, folk chemistry, and jealously guarded craft. So let us pause for a moment and step from the clean scriptorium into the preparation room, a place of pots, powders, and strange earthy smells, to create the lifeblood of the written word, iron gall ink. Your first and most important ingredient comes not from a mine or a workshop, but from the forest. You need oak galls. These are not a fruit or a nut, but a strange and wonderful creation. Your first ingredient comes from a fascinating partnership between an oak tree and a tiny wasp. The gall wasp lays its eggs in the tender bark of a young oak twig. In response to this intrusion, the tree's defensive chemistry goes into overdrive, growing a hard spherical woody home around the developing larva. The tree basically builds a little wooden nursery around it out of pure, unadulterated annoyance. You're harvesting tree annoyance. These galls, which look like small, light wooden apples, are incredibly rich in a chemical called gallatanic acid. This is your active ingredient. You take a handful of these dry, brittle galls and drop them into a heavy stone mortar. With a pestle, you begin to crush them. The sound is a dry, cracking crunch. You grind them down not to a fine powder, but to a coarse, gritty consistency like rough breadcrumbs. You tip this powder into a large earthenware pot and pour in your solvent. The best choice is clean rainwater, but many recipes call for wine or stale beer, as the alcohol and acidity were thought to help the chemical process and act as a preservative. You leave this mixture to steep for several days, stirring it occasionally. Slowly, the water pulls the tannic acid from the galls, turning the liquid a pale, reddish brown, the color of weak tea. Your second key ingredient is vitriol, a word that sounds like it belongs to an alchemist's laboratory, and for good reason. It is a mineral salt known today as iron 2I sulfate. In the medieval world, it was scraped as a greenish-white crystalline crust from mineral deposits or purposefully manufactured. You take a measure of these green crystals and dissolve them in a separate pot of water, stirring until the liquid is clear. Now for the moment of creation. You have your pot of brownish acidic gall extract and your pot of pale green iron solution. You take the iron solution and pour it in a steady stream into the gall mixture. The reaction is instantaneous and breathtaking. The moment the two liquids touch, the mixture blossoms into a deep, rich, opaque black. You mix the two clearish liquids, and suddenly, poof, instant black. It's the kind of dramatic, color-changing chemistry that would make you a superstar at a medieval science fair, or possibly get you accused of witchcraft, depending on the audience. The tannic acid has reacted with the iron salts to create iron galatanate, a stable black pigment. This is the chemical heart of your ink. But the ink is not yet complete. This simple mixture of pigment and water would be runny and the pigment would settle out. You need a binder to give it body and flow. For this, you turn to another exotic ingredient, one that comes on the trade routes from Africa and the Middle East, gum arabic. It arrives in the form of hard, glassy, amber-colored lumps which are the dried sap of the acacia tree. You grind these lumps into a fine powder and slowly stir it into your black ink. The gum dissolves, thickening the ink to the consistency of thin cream and acting as a suspension agent, keeping the black particles evenly distributed. Historians still argue whether medieval ink makers had a true chemical understanding of their process, knowing the importance of ratios and purity, or if they were simply following recipes by rote, with success and failure being a constant surprise. The fact that ink in many manuscripts visibly changes color from one page to the next suggests that consistency was a major challenge, and the process was likely one of trial, error, and closely guarded tradition. Some recipes even called for tossing a handful of rusty nails into the brew to strengthen the black, a surprisingly effective, if unscientific, way to increase the iron content. What you've created is a potent, slightly corrosive, permanent ink. It's perfect for writing down eternal truths or just a very strongly worded complaint to the local abbot. This ink does not mess around. You pour a small amount of your fresh black concoction into the inkhorn on your desk. The tools are made, the canvas is prepared, the medium is brewed. The moment has finally come to bring them all together. You sit before the prepared page. The light from the window illuminates the faint shimmering grid of the ruling. The quill, freshly cut and hardened, feels light and perfectly balanced in your fingers, a natural extension of your hand. The inkhorn is open, its contents a small dark pool of potential. Every single step of the past several months, from the pasture to the pit to the pouncing, has been for this. This is the moment the vessel is finally filled. This is the moment the pen touches the vellum. You take a calming breath, a small ritual to focus the mind and steady the hand. You dip your quill into the fresh ink. It's the point of no return. You're committing to the page now. Your pristine vellum is about to lose its innocence. You don't plunge the quill in deeply, but touch the surface just enough for the slit in the nib to draw up the dark liquid through capillary action. You touch the tip lightly to the inside rim of the inkhorn to wick off any excess, preventing a disastrous blob on that first, crucial stroke. You bring the pen to the page. Your hand hovers for a split second above the top horizontal line. Then, you touch down. The first thing you notice is the sound. Paper is soft and absorbent. It deadens the sound of a pen. Vellum is different. It is a hard, resilient animal surface. As you draw the quill downward to form the first stroke of the first letter, you hear it. It's a crisp, distinct scraping sound. It is the sound of a sharp-edged feather tip moving across a tight, slightly abrasive surface. It's a dry, rustling scratch, a conversation between the pen and the page. It's not annoying like nails on a chalkboard. It's the satisfying sound of permanence, the ASMR of the Dark Ages. This sound provides constant auditory feedback, telling you about your speed, your pressure, the quality of the surface. The second thing you notice is the feeling. Writing on vellum is not a frictionless glide. There is a tangible, pleasing resistance. You can feel the texture of the page, the tooth you so carefully created, transmitted up through the light, hollow quill into your fingertips. It's a controlled friction that gives you immense command over your strokes. You can feel the tines of the nib flex as you apply a little pressure on a downstroke, laying down a broad, bold line of ink. Then, As you move into a horizontal or upward stroke, you lighten the pressure and the nib skates on its sharp corner, producing a hairline. This natural thick and thin variation, born from the shape of the broad-edged nib, is the very essence of the formal Gothic script you are writing. The third thing you notice is the sight of the ink itself. As it flows from the nib, it sits on the vellum's surface for a magical instant. A wet, glossy, jet-black line. The edges are perfectly crisp and sharp, a sign that the pouncing and whitening were done well. There is no bleeding, no feathering of the ink into the surrounding fibers. Then, as the water from the ink begins to absorb into the prepared surface, the initial gloss gives way to a deep, velvety matte black. It has officially bonded with the page. You couldn't remove that letter now without performing minor surgery, so you really hope you spelled the word right. You lift the quill, move it to the next position, and form the next letter, and the next. You fall into a rhythm, a steady and meditative pace. Dip, stroke, lift, dip, stroke, lift. Your eyes are focused on the line. Your ears are filled with the crisp scratching of the quill. And your hand is translating the text from your exemplar, the master copy, onto this new, pristine page. Historians still argue whether a scribe producing a high-quality book like this worked at a slow, painstaking, almost prayerful pace, or if they achieved a state of practiced, rhythmic efficiency, writing fluidly for hours. The answer is likely that it was a blend of both. Moments of deep meditative flow punctuated by the constant conscious need for precision and control. It is a dance of mind and material, and for the first time this object made of skin and wasp nests and volcanic rock is beginning to speak. You are in a state of deep, meditative flow. The world outside the scriptorium has faded away. There is only the exemplar text, the pristine page, and the rhythmic scratch of your quill. Line after line, the black letters appear on the white vellum, a perfect and orderly procession. You are a conduit, a vessel for the text, and then it happens. A moment's distraction, a cough from another scribe, a fly buzzing near the window, and your hand writes a word that your mind has already passed. You finish the line, and as your eyes scan back, you see it. An error, a repeated word, a foolish misspelling. Your eye twitches. The whole rhythm of the universe is thrown off by a rogue syllable. A lesser scribe might weep. You just let out a slow, quiet sigh and reach for your knife. There is no modern eraser in your world. The ink you have laid down has already begun a chemical reaction with the vellum, biting into its surface. It cannot be lifted. It can only be removed through a process of careful, deliberate destruction. You are about to perform a vellumectomy. It's a delicate surgical procedure to remove the offending tissue. Your patient, the page, will have a small scar, but with your skill, it will be barely noticeable to the casual reader. First, you must wait. The ink must be bone dry. To attempt this surgery on even slightly damp ink would result in a catastrophic smear, a black mark of shame that would be almost impossible to fix. So you wait, perhaps working on another page, giving the offending letters plenty of time to set. Once you are certain the ink is dry, you take up your erasing knife. It is not your penknife. This blade is smaller, often with a curved or leaf-shaped tip, and it is kept ferociously sharp. With the handle of the knife clutched in your fingers like a surgeon's scalpel, you bend over the page. Your touch is impossibly light. You are not cutting, you are scraping. With the very tip of the blade held at a low angle, you begin to gently abrade the surface of the vellum. The sound is a whispery, patient shh, shh, shh. A fine, dark powder begins to form, a mixture of dried ink and the very top layer of the vellum itself. You pause, blow the dust away, and inspect your work. The black letter is a little fainter. You continue, stroke after gentle stroke, slowly, painstakingly scraping the ink away, molecule by molecule. It is a battle of attrition. This process reveals the incredible resilience of your writing surface. If this were papyrus, you would have already created a hole. If it were paper, the surface would be a fuzzy, ruined mess. But vellum is thick, tough, and forgiving. It allows for this kind of violence. It allows for mistakes. Evidence of these corrections is found in countless manuscripts. Modern scholars using ultraviolet light can often see the ghost of the scraped-away text. the faint trace of iron from the ink that is soaked just a little too deep to be completely removed. Once every trace of the black ink is gone, you are left with a small, slightly rough patch on the page. The fibers have been fluffed up by the scraping. You now take up your burnisher, a smooth, hard tool made of polished agate, hematite, or even a dog's tooth set and a handle. You rub this tool vigorously over the scraped area. The pressure and friction work like a tiny iron, compressing the raised fibers back down, making the surface smooth, hard, and almost glossy again. The spot is now smooth, but it lacks the tooth of the surrounding area. So, for the final step, you take a tiny pinch of your chalk or pounce powder and gently rub it into the corrected patch, restoring its ability to accept ink. Now, with a steady hand, you can write the correct letters into the repaired space. Historians still argue whether the constant act of making and correcting such errors was seen by scribes as a mundane technical part of the job, or if it carried a deeper, more theological weight, a constant physical reminder of human fallibility in the divine work of copying God's word. The occasional frustrated note scribbled in a margin, "Oh, my hand," suggests that at least sometimes it was simply a massive pain. For a very small error, like a single letter, a scribe might not even bother with all this, instead placing tiny dots below the wrong letters to tell the reader, "Ignore these," a method called expunctuation. The correction is made. The scar is minimal. The flow of the text is restored. You can now return to your work. The crisis averted. Your page once again on the path to perfection, its brief brush with sin scraped cleanly away. The text is complete. The scribe's patient black script fills the page in neat, orderly columns. For a simple book, the work might end here. But this is not a simple book. This manuscript is destined for a cathedral, a king, or a wealthy patron. Now the page must be elevated from a mere carrier of information into an object of dazzling beauty and divine reverence. The bifolium moves from the quiet desk of the scribe to the colorful, cluttered workshop of the illuminator. You are no longer just a scribe. You are now part artist, part alchemist. Your palette consists of crushed-up semi-precious stones, toxic metals, and the occasional insect. It's a far cry from a simple pot of black ink. The scribe has left strategic gaps in the text, large spaces for initial letters to begin a chapter, and wide, empty margins for decorative borders. Your first task is to apply the light, the lumen from which your craft, illumination, gets its name. You are going to apply gold. To make the gold gleam with a raised three-dimensional brilliance, you cannot simply glue it on. You must first build a foundation. This is a special kind of plaster called gesso. You mix it yourself from fine gypsum powder, a little lead white for density, and a binder. Perhaps some fish glue or glaire made from egg whites. You paint this thick, paste-like gesso precisely where the gold will go, building it up layer by layer to create a raised cushion. When it dries, you polish it to a perfect smoothness. Now comes the most delicate and nerve-wracking part of your job. You take out a tiny, impossibly thin square of gold leaf. This is pure gold, beaten between sheets of leather until it is thinner than a spider's web. A gossamer sheet that will fly away or disintegrate with a single clumsy breath. Applying gold leaf is a battle against physics. It's lighter than air, attracted to everything by static electricity, and will disintegrate if you look at it too hard. You have to be part ninja, part watchmaker, and hold your breath a lot. You gently breathe on the gesso cushion. The faint moisture from your breath makes the surface tacky. Then, using a special brush to lift the gold, you lay it carefully over the raised design. The gold sheet drapes limply over the gesso. You press it down with a soft bit of cotton, and then the magic begins. You take up your burnisher. This is a tool with a tip made of a perfectly smooth, hard stone like agate or hematite. A wolf's or dog's tooth, prized for its natural density and polish, was also a favorite. You rub this tool firmly and briskly over the gold leaf. The friction and pressure transform the dull, matte surface into a brilliant, solid, mirror-like shine. The light of the workshop now flashes and dances on the page. With the gilding complete, you turn to your colors. These are not simple paints. They are powdered pigments, each ground by hand in a mortar and pestle and stored in a small shell or pot. The blue you are using, ultramarine, is literally ground up lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan. It is worth more than its weight in gold. You use it very, very carefully because spilling it is the medieval equivalent of crashing a sports car. The vibrant red is vermilion, from the toxic mineral cinnabar. The green is from ground malachite. The yellow from poisonous orpiment. To turn these powders into paint, you mix them with egg tempera. You crack an egg, separate the yolk, and carefully mix the viscous yolk with the pigment and a little water. This binder will make the paint flow smoothly and dry to a hard, permanent matte finish. With your finest brushes, made from the delicate hairs of a squirrel or ermine-s tail, you begin to paint, filling in the intricate designs of vines, leaves, and flowers around the brilliant gold letters. You work slowly, with a surgeon's precision, applying the color in flat, opaque layers. Historians still argue whether these complex designs were original creations born from the illuminator's imagination, or if artists worked from pattern books filled with stock images and motifs that they adapted and combined for each new project. Slowly, the page blossoms into life. What was once a monochrome grid of text is now a garden of jewel-like color and celestial light. The vellum itself is the perfect canvas for this. Its smooth, non-porous surface does not absorb the paint, allowing the pigments to sit on top in all their brilliant, undiluted glory. The page is now a treasure, an object that communicates not just through its words, but through its sheer breathtaking beauty. The page is finally finished. The scribe's words and the illuminator's art have come together to create a small masterpiece. The gold leaf flashes, and the brilliant colors of the pigments seem to glow with an inner light against the creamy white of the vellum. But a book is not a single page. A book is a gathering, a community of pages bound together. The individual, flat decorated bifolia that now lie in a neat stack on your workbench, must be transformed from a collection of sheets into the fundamental building blocks of a book. They must be folded and gathered into quires. The process is deceptively simple, but it is the structural heart of the codex, the book form that has dominated for nearly 2,000 years. You, now in the role of the bookbinder or a senior scribe overseeing the book's assembly, take the first bifolium from the stack. It is a large, rectangular sheet with text and illumination on both sides, carefully planned so that the pages will be in the correct order after folding. You place it on a clean, flat surface. You find the center, often marked by the faint vertical crease from where it was originally folded to help the scribe align the text columns, or by the central pricking marks you made before ruling. Aligning the edges perfectly, you make the single, crucial fold. With a piece of smooth, polished bone or ivory, a tool called a bone folder, you press down firmly, running it along the spine to create a crisp, sharp, permanent crease. This one action has transformed the flat sheet. What was one rectangle is now two conjoined leaves. What was a front and a back is now a sequence of 4 pages. Page 1 on the front, pages 2 and 3 on the inside spread, and page 4 on the back. The bifolium is now a folio. You set this first folded sheet aside and take the next one from the stack. You fold it in precisely the same way. Now you perform the action that defines the quire. You take the second folded sheet and nest it inside the first. You continue this process, folding a third bifolium and nesting it inside the second, then a fourth inside the third. You are creating a small booklet. This nested gathering of folded sheets is a quire, from the Latin quaterni, which originally meant a set of 4 sheets. The standard quire for most of the Middle Ages was made of 4 bifolia, which, when folded and nested, produced a booklet of 8 leaves or 16 pages. This was considered a comfortable and structurally sound unit. However, the number could vary. Historians still argue whether the decision to use quires of different sizes, some with as few as 2 bifolia, a binion, or as many as 6, a sexternion, was dictated by the availability of the vellum, the specific structural needs of a particularly large and heavy book, or if it was simply a matter of local workshop practice and tradition. Once your first quire is assembled, you check it carefully. You flip through the 8 leaves, ensuring that all the pages are present in the correct order and that the text flows logically from one page to the D. You also ensure that the pages are arranged according to the illuminator's plan, so that, for example, a heavily decorated page on the right-hand side faces a similarly important page on the left of the next opening. The vellum pages, being a natural material, also have a memory of their hair side and flesh side. For a deluxe book, you would have planned the layout so that any open spread always showed two flesh sides or two hair sides facing each other, a subtle but important detail known as Gregory's Rule that created a uniform appearance. It was the codicological equivalent of matching the grain on fine cabinetry. You continue this process, folding and nesting, until all the bifolia for the entire book have been gathered into a stack of neat, orderly quires. A large Bible might be composed of 30 or 40 such quires. It's like building a house brick by brick. Each quire is a single, solid structural unit. To keep them in order, you might add a small signature mark at the bottom of the first or last page of each quire, a letter of the alphabet or a Roman numeral, so that when it comes time to sew them together, you can be sure that quire C follows quire B. This stack of loose, unbound booklets is now the complete text block of your manuscript. The long journey of the individual skin is over. The collective journey of the book is about to begin. The next step is to bind them, to give them the unity and permanence of a single volume. The stack of folded quires on your bench represents the soul and the voice of the book, but it lacks a body. It is a collection of loose booklets, vulnerable and disconnected. Your task now, as the bookbinder, is to give it unity and strength. You are a book surgeon stitching the disparate parts of this body of text into a unified whole. Your bedside manner is excellent and your stitches are impeccable. No pressure, the next 1,000 years are depending on it. The journey now leads you to the sewing frame. First, you prepare the quires. You jog them into a perfect stack, their spines aligned, and place them in a large wooden press. You turn the heavy screw and the press closes, compacting the quires with immense pressure. This squeezes out the air trapped between the pages, firms up the folds of the spine, and turns the loose stack into a dense, solid block of vellum. While the block is in the press, you mark the spine for sewing, creating small notches with an awl or a saw where your needle will pass through. You then move to the sewing frame. It looks a bit like a miniature medieval harp, a simple wooden structure with a base and two uprights supporting a crossbar. Between the base and the crossbar, you stretch several lengths of strong cord, made of hemp or flax. These vertical cords are the book's backbone, the supports onto which you will sew each quire. You align them perfectly with the marks you made on the spine. With your waxed linen thread and a large needle, you are ready. You take the first quire, the last one in the book's final order, as you will build the text block from back to front. You open it to its centerfold and place it against the cords on the sewing frame. You pass your needle from the inside of the fold out through the first hole. You guide the thread around the first cord and then pass the needle back into the same hole, securing the quire to the support. You repeat this down the line, out through a hole, around the next cord, and back in. It is a simple, strong, in and out stitch that anchors the pages to their flexible spine. When you reach the end of the first quire, you pick up the second and lay it neatly on top. You continue sewing, this time in the opposite direction. At the beginning and end of each pass, you make a special linking stitch, looping the thread from the new quire into the stitch of the one below it. This is the kettle stitch from a German word for chain stitch, and it creates a strong, flexible chain of thread at the head and tail of the spine that locks all the quires to each other independent of the cords. You fall into a steady, patient rhythm. Add a quire, sew down its length, looping around each cord, then add a kettle stitch to lock it to its neighbor. Quire by quire, the text block grows. Historians and book conservators still argue whether the ideal sewing technique involved pulling the thread as tightly as possible to create a rigid, robust spine, or if a slightly looser tension was preferred. A looser sewing allowed the book to open more easily and lie flat for reading, but a tighter sewing provided more structural support for the heavy vellum pages. The choice likely depended on the book's size and how it would be used. The waxed thread slides smoothly through the vellum, the needle rising and falling in your hand. This is quiet, repetitive, meditative work. With each stitch, you are weaving together the disparate pages into a single object. You are giving the book its physical integrity, its ability to be opened and closed and read for centuries. Finally, the last quire is stitched into place. You tie off your thread. You can now release the tension on the vertical cords and lift the completed text block from the frame. It's floppy and naked, but it's unified. The cords you sewed around now protrude a few inches from each side of the spine. These are not trimmed away. They are essential for the next step. The book has gone from being a stack of pamphlets to being a real book, albeit one that's missing its clothes. It is now ready for its armor, the strong wooden boards that will become its covers. The sewn text block is a marvel of flexibility and strength, a unified column of pages held together by a web of linen thread. But it is also vulnerable. It is a body without a skeleton, soft and susceptible to the twists and cockles that humidity can inflict upon vellum. It now requires a suit of armor. It needs its boards. You move from the quiet precision of the sewing frame to the dusty, fragrant corner of the workshop that serves as your woodshop. You are about to make a small, very fancy piece of furniture to house your book. Your material of choice is oak. Not just any oak, but a thick plank of quarter-sawn timber, well-seasoned, and dried for years until it is as stable and reliable as the ancient tree it came from. This isn't flimsy cardboard, this is solid oak. The goal is to create two boards that are as flat and stable as possible. Any warping in the wood, and your beautiful book will slowly curl up into the world's most scholarly potato chip over the next few centuries. You lay the sewn text block on the plank and carefully measure its height and width. You add a little extra on the top, bottom, and foredge. This slight overhang, called the squares, will act as a protective bumper, ensuring the wooden cover takes the brunt of any bumps and scrapes, leaving the delicate edges of the vellum pages unharmed. With your measurements marked, you take up your saw and with a cloud of fragrant dust and a grating rhythm, you cut the two rough boards. Now you turn to your hand plane. This is where brute force gives way to fine skill. Pushing the heavy, sharp-bladed plane across the surface of the wood, you peel away translucent shavings one pass at a time. The rhythmic shuff-shuff of the plane is the only sound. You work the surface down until it is perfectly, glassily flat, checking it constantly with your eye and a straight edge. You do this for both sides of both boards, ensuring they are of a uniform thickness. Historians and bookbinders still argue whether the final thickness of the boards was determined by a strict formula, a set ratio based on the book's dimensions, or if it was a more aesthetic choice, left to the binder's eye and feel for what would properly balance and contain the weight of the text block. The boards are now flat rectangles, but they lack refinement. You begin to shape the edges. The three outer edges you bevel slightly, softening the sharp corners. But the inner edge, the one that will lie alongside the spine, receives special attention. You shape it to be slightly rounded or cushioned, which will allow the cover to hinge open smoothly without putting undue stress on the binding. The final and most crucial step is to prepare the boards for their marriage to the text block. You lay one of the finished boards beside the spine, precisely where it will sit. The strong hemp cords that you sewed the book on are lying flat against the vellum. You mark their positions on the edge of the wooden board. Now you carve little tunnels and holes in the boards for these sewing cords to pass through. It's like building a miniature secret passageway system. On the inner face of the board, you use a chisel or a gouge to carve a shallow channel for each cord, starting at the spine edge and running an inch or two into the board. Then from the outer face, you use an awl or drill to make a hole that connects down into the end of that channel. You have now created a lacing path. The cord will enter the edge of the board, run along its hidden channel, pass up through the hole to the outside, and then be pegged securely in place. This method will physically integrate the text block and its covers into a single, incredibly strong unit. The boards aren't just glued on, they are physically stitched to the book's spine. You repeat this process for the second board. They stand ready, two slabs of solid oak, perfectly shaped and engineered, waiting to become the guardians of the words within. The stage is set for the final assembly. On your workbench lies the sewn text block with its protruding cords, and beside it, the two perfectly carved oak boards. The moment has come to unite them, and then to dress the book in its final, durable, and beautiful skin. For this you will use leather. You have a large piece of vegetable tanned calfskin or goat skin, dyed a rich brown, lying ready. Leather, like the vellum it will protect, is a natural, forgiving, and incredibly strong material. First, you must attach the boards. This is the structural core of the binding. You take the cords from one side of the spine and taper the ends slightly. Then, you lace each cord into its corresponding pre-carved channel in the wooden board. You pull them tight, seating the edge of the board snugly against the shoulder of the spine. You then pass the end of the cord up through the hole you drilled to the outside of the board, pull it taut, and hammer a small wooden peg or wedge into the hole alongside it, locking the cord permanently in place. You trim the excess cord flush with the board. You repeat this for all the cords on both boards. The book is now one integrated unit. The text block and its heavy wooden covers are physically interlocked, an engineering solution of immense strength and longevity. With the boards attached, the book is structurally complete but looks raw and unfinished, with the pegged cords visible on the outside. It needs its covering. You take your large piece of leather and submerge it in a basin of water until it is thoroughly soaked and pliable. Then you lay it flat on your workbench, flesh side up, and apply a thick, sticky layer of binder's paste, a glue made from wheat starch or flour. You lay the open book down onto the center of the pasted leather. Now begins a process of careful sculptural wrapping. You pull the damp leather up and over the edges of the boards, first at the head and tail, then along the foredges. You use your bone folder to smooth the leather down, pressing it tightly against the wood and eliminating any air bubbles. The wet leather is wonderfully malleable, stretching and conforming to the shape of the boards. You carefully pleat and trim the corners to create neat, sharp joins, much like wrapping a very important and very rectangular gift. You work the leather into the space between the boards and the spine, ensuring a snug fit that will become a flexible hinge. You set the book aside to dry for a day or two, perhaps under a light weight to ensure the leather adheres perfectly flat. Once it is dry, or in-board, the book is a plain, leather-bound volume. It is strong and protected, but it lacks personality and ornament. Now the final artistry begins, the tooling. This is the process of decorating the leather cover with impressed patterns. Your tools, called finishing tools or stamps, are small brass or bronze dies, each with a design cut into its face. A fleur-de-lis, a rosette, a dragon, a simple geometric pattern, set into a long wooden handle. You heat these tools over a small charcoal brazier. The key is to get them to the right temperature, hot enough to create a dark permanent impression in the leather, but not so hot that they scorch it. This is a skill learned only through feel and experience. With a hot tool, you press down firmly and squarely onto the leather cover. There is a faint hiss and a wisp of steam as the heat and pressure create a dark, burnished, debossed line or pattern. This is called blind tooling because you are not adding any color. Historians still argue whether the intricate repeating patterns on many medieval bindings were laid out using complex geometric calculations with rulers and compasses, or if master binders developed such an expert eye that they could produce stunningly symmetrical designs almost freehand. For a truly deluxe binding, you might add gold. This process, gold tooling, is even more demanding. You would first make the blind impression, then paint the inside of it with a thin layer of glaire, egg white. You would lay a small piece of gold leaf over the sticky impression, and then take your heated tool and press it perfectly into the same spot again. The heat and pressure make the gold adhere permanently inside the debossed line. You then brush away the excess gold leaf, leaving behind a brilliant, shining line of gold set into the dark leather. Slowly, painstakingly, you build up your design, one impression at a time, transforming the plain leather cover into a rich tapestry of texture and light. Your book is a thing of beauty. The tooled leather cover is rich with texture and perhaps the glint of gold. But your work as a binder is not quite finished. A medieval book, particularly one made of vellum, is an active living object. The pages swell and contract with the humidity, and their collective force is immense. Left to its own devices, your book would spring open, its pages slowly warping and undulating. Furthermore, this heavy volume will spend its life being slid across wooden lecterns and shelves. It needs a final layer of protection. It needs its furniture. You are now a metalworker in miniature, attaching the hardware that will fortify your book for the centuries to come. First and most importantly, you will add the clasps. The clasps are basically a seatbelt for the book, keeping the vellum pages from getting unruly and deciding to spring open in the middle of the night. It's a straitjacket for a hyperactive book. You have a set of finely cast brass fittings. The first part is a long leather strap, attached to the foredge of the back cover and ending in an ornate metal hook. The second part is the catch, a small raised metal plate you will attach to the front cover. With a fine awl, you punch holes through the leather and the oak board. You then use small brass pins or rivets to secure the base of the leather strap and the metal catch to the covers, hammering the ends of the pins flat on the inside of the board. The placement of clasps was a matter of regional tradition. Historians of bookbinding still argue whether the common English practice of having the straps hinged on the back cover and clasping onto the front was a functionally different choice from the German tradition, which often did the reverse. You close the book, pull the strap over the foredge, and secure the hook into the catch. There is a satisfying, solid click. The book is now held firmly closed, its pages kept flat under constant, gentle pressure. Next, you will protect the cover itself from abrasion. You will add bosses. These are raised metal studs that act as little feet for the book. When you lay the heavy volume down, the bosses will hold the delicate tooled leather surface a few millimeters off the table, protecting it from scratches and wear. You will place 5 bosses on each cover in a traditional pattern, 1 in each corner and 1 in the center. Each brass boss has a shank on its underside. You punch a hole through the cover and push the shank through, then splay the end open on the inside of the board to hold it tight. To further protect the book, you might also add metal corner pieces, L-shaped plates of brass that reinforce the vulnerable wooden corners against bumps and drops. After adding all this brass hardware, your book now weighs roughly the same as a small dog. It's not just a book, it's a piece of furniture, a defensive weapon, and a decent workout all in one. For this particular volume, destined for a cathedral library, there is one final piece of hardware. This book is too valuable to be left to wander. It must be chained. Adding a chain is the final touch for any truly valuable book. It says, "I trust you to read this, but I absolutely do not trust you to walk away with it." It's the medieval version of a security tag, but way more obvious. You take a heavy iron staple and drive it deep into the bottom edge of one of the wooden boards. To this, you affix the last link of a short but strong iron chain. The other end of the chain terminates in a metal ring. This ring will slide onto a long iron bar running along the front of the library shelf. The book can be taken from the shelf and read at the adjacent lectern, but it cannot be removed from the library. Now you stand back and look. The book is complete. It is a fortified treasure, a small, self-contained vault of knowledge. The gleaming brass of the clasps and bosses stands out against the dark leather, a statement of strength and permanence. It is heavy in your hands, solid, enduring. The long and intricate process of its birth is finally over. Its new life, a life of service, of being read, and of simple, patient survival, is about to begin. The book is finished. It rests on your workbench, a heavy, solid, self-contained world of text and art. Its clasps are closed, its bosses gleam, and its chain lies coiled beside it. The long, slow, and messy process of its creation is complete. From a living calf in a sunlit field to this fortified object of knowledge, the journey has been one of constant, deliberate transformation. And now, its second life begins, the life of survival. What you have created is more than just a book. It is a time capsule, engineered to last. The primary reason for its incredible potential for longevity is the vellum itself. Vellum is the cockroach of the stationery world. It just doesn't want to die. Unlike paper, which is made of fragile, acidic plant fibers, vellum is made of collagen, a stable animal protein. The intense liming process has purified it and made it alkaline, a chemical environment that is hostile to the kind of acid decay that turns old paperback books brown and brittle. It is incredibly strong, resistant to tears, and fundamentally more robust than almost any other writing material humanity has ever devised. Imagine your book being placed on its shelf in a cathedral library in, say, the year 1250. It sits in the cool, dim light held shut by its clasps. Outside the stone walls, seasons turn into years, years into decades, decades into centuries. Dynasties rise and fall. Plagues and wars reshape the continent. The Black Death scours the population. The Renaissance dawns. The Reformation tears the church in two. And through it all, the book sits, its vellum pages holding their ink, their gold, their color, in a state of suspended animation. Of course, its survival is not guaranteed. It faces many enemies. Fire is the most dramatic. If a library burns, vellum does not ignite like paper, but it reacts to the intense heat with a terrible, violent shrinking. It contorts and hardens into a stiff, warped, almost plastic-like substance, its pages fused together, its text lost in a landscape of blackened wrinkles. Water is a more insidious foe. A flood or a leaking roof can cause the pages to swell and stick together into a solid, inseparable block of gelatinous collagen, while mold blooms in the damp, feasting on the glue in the binding. And then there are the smaller enemies. Yes, bookworms are a real thing. The larvae of various beetles can tunnel through a book, leaving a trail of destruction, but they often preferred the tasty starch paste and animal glue in the spine, or the wooden boards to the vellum itself. Apparently, even for medieval pests, the main course was better than eating the tough, leathery menu it was written on. Yet, often the greatest threat came from humans. Books were stolen, destroyed during political or religious upheavals, or perhaps most sadly, dismantled by later generations of collectors who valued a single illuminated page more than the intact book. Sometimes, paradoxically, a book survived because its text was deemed unimportant. The writing would be painstakingly scraped away, and the page would be reused for a new text. This recycled page of palimpsest becomes a layered document with the ghost of the original text, sometimes recoverable with modern imaging technology. A lost work of Aristotle, or a forgotten Roman play surviving only because the vellum itself was too valuable to discard. For a book to survive 800 years, it needed good materials, a strong binding, and a whole lot of luck. Mostly it had to be just important enough not to be thrown away, but not so important that everyone was constantly handling it with greasy fingers. It's a delicate balance. Its survival is a minor miracle, a testament to every craftsman in the long chain of its creation. Historians still argue whether these precious objects were transported across Europe in custom-made wooden chests, simple cloth wraps, or in ornate leather satchels called cumdae, which were themselves protective treasures. But however it traveled, and wherever it rested, the book endured. Its physical presence is our most direct, tangible link to the minds and hands of the medieval world. But that world, and the dominance of this incredible material, was about to face a revolution. Your book, a fortress of knowledge built from oak and leather and brass, is a product of its time. It is the pinnacle of 1,000 years of technology, a perfect expression of the medieval world's reverence for the written word. It was made to endure, but even as you close the clasps on this masterpiece, a shadow is falling across your world, cast not by a rival kingdom or a new philosophy, but by a new material. And then, a new kid shows up in town. Its name is paper. It's made from old clothes, it's a bit flimsy, and it's ridiculously cheap. Vellum, the established aristocrat, looks at this upstart with a mixture of confusion and contempt. Paper, a technology that had trickled into Europe from China via the Arab world, was at first a curiosity. Made from pulped linen and cotton rags, it was seen as a less noble, less permanent substitute for the time-honored vellum. Historians still argue whether its initial adoption was met with widespread enthusiasm for its convenience, or with deep suspicion from a culture that equated permanence with value. Early legal documents, for instance, often explicitly forbade the use of paper, trusting only the proven longevity of animal skin. For a time, the two materials coexisted. Vellum was for the important things: Bibles, luxury prayer books, royal charters, documents intended to last for eternity. Paper was for more ephemeral items: business accounts, personal letters, university notes, things that needed to be written down but not necessarily preserved for 1,000 years. But the balance of power was about to shift dramatically, and the catalyst was a machine. In the middle of the 15th century, Gutenberg's invention of the printing press with movable type changed the world. The printing press was a hungry beast. It didn't want one perfect calfskin per week, it wanted 1,000 uniform sheets per day. Its entire purpose was mass production, and it created an insatiable demand for a writing surface that was cheap, consistent, and available in enormous quantities. Trying to feed a printing press with vellum would be like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon. The material and the machine were fundamentally incompatible. Paper, on the other hand, was the perfect partner for print. A paper mill, powered by a water wheel, could churn out reams of uniform sheets, ready for the press. The marriage of cheap paper and mass production printing was the revolution. It fueled the Renaissance and the Reformation, spreading ideas with a speed that was previously unimaginable. The slow, patient, sacred world of the manuscript, of which your Vellum book is the ultimate expression, was coming to an end. Vellum didn't disappear overnight. For decades, the wealthiest patrons would commission printers to produce special edition copies of new books on vellum, a fusion of the old world's prestige with the new world's technology. But its reign as the primary carrier of knowledge was over. Vellum eventually retired from the mainstream book world. It became a specialist, the semi-retired movie star who only shows up for very important cameos, like a royal wedding certificate or a fancy university diploma. It still gets the prestige gigs. The slow craft you have witnessed, from the quiet pasture to the finished fortified book, represents the end of an era. It is a monument to a time when information was precious, permanent, and painstakingly made by human hands, one flawless, luminous, and incredibly durable page at a time. And so, our long journey is at an end. We can leave our book now, resting safely on its shelf in the quiet, sleeping library. The moonlight from a high window might just catch the polished brass of a corner boss, or the faint glint of gold on its tooled spine. It is an object of profound peace, the culmination of so much slow, patient, and purposeful work. Think of the chain of hands that brought it into being, a long and quiet procession stretching back through time. The binder, with their waxy thread and sharp-smelling glue. The illuminator, grinding brilliant stones into dust. The scribe, whose patient scratching was the only sound in the silent room. The parchmenter, standing in the cold river in the dusty workshop, turning a simple skin into a luminous page. Even the farmer, walking in the quiet fields of a world so very long ago. Each of them performed their task with a slowness that is almost unimaginable to us now. Theirs was a world without hurry, a world where the turning of the seasons was the only clock that truly mattered, and in their slow, rhythmic, and repetitive motions, there is a deep and peaceful lesson. Let the memory of their patient craft soothe your mind now. Let the sounds of the workshop, the scraping, the sewing, the tapping, fade into a gentle, distant hum. There is no more work to be done. The book is finished. The story is told. And now it is time for you to rest.